I've known even some good theologians who've gone wrong in this area. I mean, when you think, I'm going to switch for a minute. When you think about hell, it is terrible to think about. I mean, if you really think about it, and so many theologians have tried to dance around it and explain it away, that it doesn't exist, or that man is just annihilated and that's done with. And I think one of the reasons why men have such a trouble with hell is because they have a version of hell that's suited more for Dante's Inferno than it is for the Scriptures, or for media, or for even evangelical preaching. We have this idea that there's all these people in hell, and they're all sorry for what they did, and they all want to run away from their sin. And if they just had one more chance to bow before the feet of Christ, they would do it. That is not the case, and I learned that from Romans 1. They have been totally and completely turned over to their own lust and their own evil. And if God were to condescend and stand in hell and throw open the doors of hell and tell everyone in there, come out, acknowledge me as God, and come out. Oh, they'd run to the door. They would run to the door, and they would slam it shut, and they would say, we would rather rot in hell than stand in the presence of your righteousness. When we're preaching the gospel, we have to understand there is no power in the eloquence of a man. There's no intellect that is sufficient. A supernatural work of God has to occur, and it occurs when a man lashes himself to the gospel and preaches the gospel. Now, so far, I have described man. Let me use a biblical term. I have described man when the tree is green. This is the normal depiction of man. But now here's what I want to tell you. We're not living in normal. What do I mean? We are working in a culture, we are living in a culture that now, I believe, and I will say it, the Western world, Europe, United States, Canada, this is not normacy. We are living in a culture that is under divine wrath, that has been turned over to reprobation. And so what we're dealing with now is far greater than even what I described beforehand. Do you see this? There was a time when I could go on a university and I could reason with people. There was a time when the law of non-contradiction actually had an impact on the secular man. That's no longer the case. And this is not just because a bunch of teachers got together and taught against the idea of absolute truth. Our nation has been turned over. So if there ever was a time not to circle the wagons, but to trust in the power of the gospel, it is now. Nothing else is going to help you. There was a time in this culture back in the 90s when all you had to do was preach a conservative message about American traditional values and you could fill up churches, and they did. That's why a lot of preachers will stand before God and they will have to know what they did. That they built their enterprises on the bones of unconverted church members. But you can no longer build a church that way. No one wants Jesus unless the Spirit of God changes their nature. I want to read just quickly. Time is going by us, but for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Now look, are they victims? No. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and of four-footed animals and crawling creatures. And it goes on, further and further into moral decadence. But here's what I want you to see. When you see all the sins that are in Romans chapter 1, do not do what most people do. They see these sins and go, because of these sins, God's judgment is going to come on America. No! If you see these sins, God's judgment has already come on America. That's what you have to understand. Because the sin here, and this is what makes me so angry, the great sin here is not what you think. It is not what men do to themselves or what men do to men. The great sin here is although they knew God, they did not want him. You need to understand something. There is nothing, no one more precious to God than is his Son. Everything God has ever done, he has done it for his Son. Your salvation was done for his Son. He's gathering a people for his Son. In the mind of God, everything has to do with his Son. And so the great sin of America, the great sin of Europe, centuries of gospel preaching, rejection after rejection after rejection after rejection of the one who is most precious in the eyes of God, his Son. And that is why any attempt to make this country conservative again, or great again, or anything else will fail, because God is concerned about one thing, and it's not a thing, it's a person, it's his Son. To be right with God, whether you're an individual or a nation, it has to do with loving his Son. Now I want to show you something else. Let's go to Isaiah and talk more about God's judgment upon the West. If this is not evident to you, I don't know how to make it evident to you. It stands on its own, even without exposition. Because of the sin of the nation of Israel, verse 1 of Isaiah chapter 3, for behold, the Lord God of hosts is going to remove from Jerusalem and Judah both supply and support, the whole supply of bread and the whole supply of water. You think that's frightening? Just wait. Verse 2, he's going to remove the mighty man and the warrior, the judge and the prophet, the diviner and the elder, the captain of 50 and the honorable man, the counselor and the expert artisan and the skillful enchanter. He's going to remove, even though there's a mixture here, the idea is he is going to remove the noble men, the worthy leaders. He's going to remove them from a people. Look at verse 4. And I will make mere lads their princes, and capricious children will rule over them. Is that not our nation? Is that not the West? People with no dignity, with no sense, no rationale, no reason, no ability to use reason. Rule by emotion. Verse 5, and the people will be oppressed, each one by another, and each one by his neighbor. The youth will storm against the elder, and the inferior against the honorable. When a man lays hold of his brother in his father's house, saying, you have a cloak, you shall be our ruler. And these ruins will be under your charge. Look down at verse 12. O my people, their oppressors are children, and women rule over them. O my people, those who guide you lead you astray and confuse the direction of your paths. But don't think for a moment that the people are victims of the rulers. No, the rulers are God's judgment on the evil of the people. And then you can make for me a long list of all these individual crimes that you hate so much that are flagrant in our society, and I will erase them all and tell you there's one particular thing that stands out exponentially above everything else, and it's the way we've treated His Son. That's what brings reprobation. It's the rejection of God through the rejection of His Son.